2004, time travel is a reality.
You are charged with violations of TEC Code 40.8, time travel with intent to alter the future.
And a crime.
What's going on, YouTube? This is Venomous Media, back with another video. Now, if you've been watching my channel, you will know 1994 is one of my favorite years of film, because of all the classics from that year, as well as superhero and comic movies, which if you've also been watching my channel, that's what I'm here for. Now, there are some I've covered, which include a smash hit that launched the careers of two of the biggest names in Hollywood, a superhero flick that struck out at the box office but became a cult favorite, and an unreleased gem that tried to stay true to its source material with almost impossible odds. You can check those all out if you haven't already. So that just leaves three more comic book movies from 1994. First, The Shadow with Alec Baldwin, which I will definitely cover at some point. Also, The Crow, but so many people have already talked about The Crow, so I don't know if I could add anything to it. Maybe break it down and compare it to the source material. I could definitely cover the sequels and TV series, but if you want me to cover the first Crow movie at some point, please comment down below. And the last comic book movie for 1994 is actually the subject of today's video. I'm talking about Timecop, which starred action and martial arts star Jean-Claude Van Damme. Now, there's a lot of people that probably don't know Timecop is based on a comic, which, to be fair, I didn't know when I first saw it as a kid. I just thought it was another JCVD vehicle, but I later learned it was a 3-part mini-series in a Dark Horse anthology run. So I wouldn't be surprised if even the most hardcore comic fans probably didn't know this was based on a comic either. Because when it comes to Dark Horse, we know Hellboy, Ghost, and of course, The Mask. But Timecop? That probably doesn't ring a bell to most people. Timecop was created by Mike Richardson and Mark Verheiden, with art by Ron Randall. Now, the first two might sound familiar because Richardson created the Mask comics, while Verheiden wrote the script for the movie. And The Mask was the first movie released under Dark Horse Entertainment, which proved to be a success. And their next film that same year would be Timecop. And I'll briefly show you the Wikipedia page of other comics from Dark Horse Entertainment that you may or may not have known got adaptations of some kind. So comment down below if you want me to do retrospects of any of these. Anyway, like The Mask, Timecop was a hit at the box office, making $101 million on a $27 million budget. However, reviews were mixed with some critics, thinking this was a Terminator knockoff, and nowhere near as ambitious as the movie that put Arnie and Cameron on the map. And I'll be honest, I wasn't too impressed with it in my first watch, just thinking it was alright and nothing special. However, during a recent watch, I really enjoyed it this time around. And no, it's not the Terminator or Back to the Future or The Fifth Element, but it's still an enjoyable movie. Anyway, let's dive into this. The action world in the 80s were dominated by the likes of Arnie, Sly, Norris, and so many others. And as the 80s were coming to an end, we would see the rise of some new blood in the action genre, including Steven Seagal with his Aikido style and Belgian kickboxing champion Jean-Claude Van Damme. And like Chuck Norris, these two would bring their martial arts skills to the big screen. And both were able to find long-term success all the way through the 90s. And if I can bring up Chuck Norris one more time, JCVD actually worked on the stunt team for his movie Missing in Action. Then came his first major role on screen as the villain in the Karate Kid-like cult classic No Retreat, No Surrender, which the young kickboxer was getting a lot of attention for. And that soon led to him being cast as a titular villain in the Arnie movie Predator, but the role would ultimately be recast with Kevin Peter Hall, when it was decided Predator needed to be physically imposing rather than a more realistic monster, which was the initial plan for JCVD's version. And while Predator was ultimately not meant to be, JCVD was about to strike gold with Bloodsport the next year, which proved to be a critical and financial success. And the movie offers started coming in for the muscles from Brussels, and he proved to be a force to be reckoned with at the box office over the next several years, with hit after hit. Then in 1994, his next movie was set to hit theaters in the form of Timecop, an action movie with time travel and futuristic elements, which had become a big thing in Hollywood for the last couple of decades. Notable among the supporting cast are Mia Sara, Gloria Rubin, Bruce McGill, and Ron Silver. The director was Peter Hames, who directed 2010, the sequel to the sci-fi classic 2001: A Space Odyssey. Sam Raimi, along with Xena co-creator Robert Tabbert, were both producers. And of course the writer was Mark Verheiden, who created the comic along with Mike Richardson, both of whom actually started coming up with a movie script for Timecop after the comic came to an end. Anyway, now that we have the cast and crew out the way, let's get into the premise. The movie starts off in the 1860s during the Civil War. a group of Confederate soldiers are killed by a time traveler with advanced weapons, and he steals their gold. Then the movie time jumps to 1994, where the government begins talking about how time travel technology exists. It's not yet possible to travel into the future, but one can go back to the past and alter time, which means the technology can be dangerous in the wrong hands. And that's when the Time Enforcement Commission, aka the TEC, is formed to police time travel, with Senator Max Combe being in charge of this new law enforcement faction. Then we're introduced to Max Walker, a police officer who visits his wife at the mall, and later that night, while they're sleeping, Max gets a call that he has to go to work. As he's leaving, he's attacked by a group of armed men who enter his house with his wife Melissa still inside, and as Max tries to help his wife, the house explodes, with Melissa seemingly dying. And another 10 years pass, and Max is now working as a TEC officer. And he's still grieving over the death of his wife Melissa, and the job has taken a toll on him since he had to bring in a fellow officer and friend named Atwood, who had been time traveling and making investments using information from the past and present. While at home, Max is attacked by two assassins who he's able to fend off. The next day, he's given a new partner named Fielding, and Max and Fielding are given a mission to travel back to 1994 to investigate a disturbance, which may be connected to the murder of Max's wife from 10 years earlier. So that was the premise. Now I'm going to talk about the source material, which isn't much to be honest. Like I said, Timecop was a 3-part series in an anthology Dark Horse book. So there's only about 20 pages of content to really critique when it comes to the source material. The hero of the Timecop comic is Max Walker, and he is an officer for the TEC, and there is some time traveling, and Max has a deceased wife, but that's really all we got from the source material, which isn't a shock given how little there is to work with to begin with, so any liberty taken isn't really a big deal. For example, the future in the comic is 2007 while the movie is 2004. So not really a big deal. And in the comics, Max travels to 1930 South Africa to stop a criminal named John Packer from stealing diamonds in a gold mine. While in the movie, Max travels to the Great Depression to stop his partner Atwood from profiting off the stock market, knowing the outcomes of the present and past. And of course, the opening starts off with Confederate soldiers from the Civil War being killed by a time traveler and stealing their gold. So yeah, not really a big change. If anything, we get to see more time travel. Also, in the comics, Max has a deceased wife, but her name is Linda, not Melissa. So again, not a big deal on the name change. Also, unlike the movie where she's killed in an explosion, it's never stated how she died in the comics. And her death has no real bearing on the story, minus Max thinking about her, versus the movie where her death is heavily connected to the plot. Also in the comic, she's not brought back to life at all, or seen again, so the movie actually gives her a bigger role and more depth. Also, Max is the only character from the comic to appear. Again, he has a wife, named Melissa in the movie rather than Linda like the comics. Also in the comics, there are a couple characters missing from the movie, including Max's superior named Captain Martin, who's filled by Bruce McGill's character Commander Matsuk, and an ally he helps in the 1930s, a South African man named Joseph M. Botto, who's an activist fighting against crime and corruption in his country. He is not at all in the movie, nor is there a character that is his equivalent. And like I mentioned in the movie, his fellow officer and friend Atwood replaces the villainous John Packer, who again is a time-traveling criminal and not an agent, who's using knowledge from the past and present to profit. Also, there are robots in the comics that Max has to travel back in time to South Africa to fight, something he doesn't do in the movie, and these are the main threat in the comics rather than the villainous politician in the movie. And in the comics, Max actually is able to destroy one of these robots with his bare hands, meaning he has some degree of strength, while in the movie, he doesn't have any super strength and seems to just be a regular human, which honestly works for me, although I would have liked to have seen the robots in the movie. Also in the comics, Max is more cocky, ill-tempered, while in the movie, he's more careful, calculated, and humane, which is another change I think was made for the better. Anyway, I think I've covered enough about the source material. Now, this would be the part where I talk about the costumes, but Max isn't a comic character that has an iconic costume where I would be mad if I didn't see it on screen. Anyway, as far as his comic costume goes, Max wears these cyclops-like shades that can actually scan things, which is actually pretty cool. He also has a bodysuit like Cable and Judge Dredd, while in the movie he has a more realistic and practical uniform on, which I'm 100% okay with. As cool as the costume looks in the comic, the more practical look worked for the movie. Also in the movie, future Max sports a Wolverine-like haircut, which Max doesn't have in the comic. Again, no big deal. And I do think Timecop was a fun comic series to read, but I do understand the changes that had to be made in order to make a compelling film, and in the end they were able to make it work. Now I'll talk about the effects, atmosphere, and aesthetics. I really love seeing 90s America in movies, like that scene in the mall. Reminds me how life was once like in the past. And like I mentioned before, despite having futuristic elements and time travel, it still kind of feels like it's set in reality. Everything doesn't look futuristic outside the vehicles and weapons, which I think look really cool for a 90s movie predicting what the 2000s would look like. Also, there aren't too many flashy effects. Most of the movie's effects seem practical, which I could appreciate, especially for a movie from this time with futuristic and time travel themes, because a lot of movies today, even stuff that's supposed to be grounded and set in reality, like the Roadhouse remake, overdoes it with the CGI. Not saying it was terrible, but come on, the CGI was obvious. So yeah, I can appreciate practical effects and minimal CGI for a movie like this from the time. Now I'll talk about the action, which is probably my biggest gripe. Despite starring the biggest martial artist at the time, the action for the movie, especially one of this caliber, is surprisingly lacking. Yes, there is some action, but again, for a JCVD movie, it's disappointing since the fight scenes are very minimal and the body count's very small. I will say there are some over-the-top but awesome kills, like JCVD freezing a guy's arm and finishing him off by knocking him all the way down to the ground where he gets electrocuted. That was really awesome to see. And as far as the critics thinking this was a knockoff of Terminator and less ambitious, which I won't argue, Terminator is the better and more iconic film, but Timecop, in my opinion, was really well made, especially for it being based on a comic with only 20 pages of source material, and trying to be a futuristic movie set more in reality. I really like the idea of this story from the comic and movie about time travel being policed, and how there are so many evil people that want to change the past for their own gain. The actors all did a great job. Obviously, Mia, Sarah, Ron Silver, Gloria Rubin, and Bruce McGill knocking it out isn't a shock. I also think JCVD really stood out too, because honestly, this is one of his more serious roles. He's not dancing around or making weird faces during fight scenes in this movie at all. He does a great job giving Max some kind of humanity and making him selfless and noble. And like I mentioned earlier, despite the mixed reception, Timecop was a hit at the box office, and JCVD was about to close out 1994 with a bang in his next movie, Street Fighter, which was also a hit at the box office despite reviews. And I'm not ashamed to admit how much I love that movie. You know, it's a complete 180 with the games. Raul Julia was brilliant as Bison, plus we got both Ming-Na and Kylie Minogue. Plus, seeing JCVD butcher the English language as one of the most American characters ever is pure gold. Anyway, back to Timecop. In 2014, in an interview with Empire Magazine, Peter Hames reflected how proud he was of Timecop, and how he thought it was JCVD's best movie. He also mentioned because the movie was doing so well at the time, there was talks of a sequel happening, which he was skeptical about doing, but he did direct JCVD 3 more times, first in Sudden Death the next year, which is my personal favorite JCVD movie, as well as Universal Soldier Regeneration, the third Universal Soldier movie JCVD appeared in 2010, and Enemies Closer, which starred Tom Scott in 2013. So there wasn't an immediate sequel to Timecop, but there was a TV series in 1997 that saw Mark Verheiden and Mike Richardson leading the charge this time around. The TV series consisted of 13 episodes, but only 9 aired, and it was canceled due to low ratings and a lack of promotion. If you want to watch it for yourself, it's available on YouTube for free. And a direct-to-video sequel called Timecop 2 eventually did happen in 2003, but not with JCVD or Peter Hames returning. Instead, the director was stuntman Steve Boyum and Fast and the Furious writer Gary Scott Thompson. And the leads this time around were Jason Scott Lee and Thomas Ian Griffith, which you can guess wasn't met with stellar reviews. Anyway, the show and sequel are their own thing for the most part, but if you want me to do a retrospect on either of these, let me know down below. And in 2014, a remake for Timecop was announced, with Mike Richardson being the producer. But as of 2024, there have been no further updates at all. So either the project has been canned for good, or is in developmental hell. Either way, I think it's for the best this movie not get a remake, because it's fine the way it is, and it's still great to watch today. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about Timecop. Did you like this movie? If so, what'd you like about it? If you didn't like it, what didn't you like? Also, have you read the comics? Did you see the direct-to-video sequel or TV series? If so, what'd you think of them? Also, do you think a remake or reboot should happen? Also, if you have ideas for my next retrospect, comment down below. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. This is Venomous Media signing off.